I've sunk way more hours into Frozenheim's campaign than I intended to, and my brain spent that time torn between a nostalgic joy for simpler, less stressful times, and bouts of frustration at the sedate pacing relative to modern real-time strategy games. Frozenheim, if you want a quick and reductive overview, is a modern-looking, Norse-themed Age of Empires-esque experience, but with more involved base building and unit production. It's not identical in that there are no novel gameplay mechanics, but it shares the slow-paced and tightly scripted mission structure controlled by the map layout. It features missions that can claim hours of your life if you're a cautious and methodical player, missions that allow you to comfortably fortify your position and push forward at your own pace. It's also good, if you've got the temperament, the time, and that nostalgic hook. The overarching story is told through 5 campaigns, each covering the trials and tribulations of a new Jarl in Frozenheim's fictional Norse world. The first functions as a lengthy tutorial, despite the presence of a discrete tutorial mission, before the subsequent campaigns ramp up the difficulty and ditch the hand-holding. Each campaign may not offer that many missions, but each is a multi-objective affair that makes full use of the map and can easily take upwards of an hour to complete. Unfortunately, the storytelling is fairly underwhelming, despite featuring internal power struggles, clan warfare, and more mythical elements. The flashy opening cinematic introduces the Frozenheim setting, but from then on, until you hit the ending cinematic, you're stuck with rudimentary in-game cutscenes, straight out of the early 2000s, with competent but uninspired narration. Now, Frozenheim's developers, Paranoid Interactive, describe their game as a serene Norse colony sim with real-time combat and rich settlement management mechanics. It's simultaneously apt and misleading. Serene, yes, insofar as you can often control the pacing in the campaign missions. Your settlement is rarely besieged in earnest, and once you've established a palisade and a few watchtowers, you're almost guaranteed victory if you build up and tech up your forces before moving out. A colony sim? Not so much. There are no missions that allow you to avoid engaging with the real-time combat entirely. As for having rich settlement management mechanics, they're definitely there, despite the criticism you'll find in forums and some reviews, but they're streamlined in comparison to other titles, and they don't dominate the experience outside of the early game. In Frozenheim, most missions start with establishing a new settlement, and first impressions are very similar to Age of Empires, or any number of classic RTS. You construct houses to increase your population cap, and build resource-gathering buildings to collect the basics like food, wood, and stone. However, there's no ethereal resource pile that you add to or draw from, so any outposts away from your primary settlement rely on their local population and resource pool. To expand and access new technologies, you need to upgrade your Jarl's homestead, which means increasing your population's average contentment levels, something that's achieved by ensuring social buildings are clustered to overlap their radius of influence, but then you need to take into account the limited build radius and plan accordingly. However, that's just the basics of Frozenheim covered. Seasonality changes population growth rates and food production, so fishing and hunting remain essential for sustaining your population in winter when your farms, orchards, and mills don't operate. Any combat units, aside from the basic scout, also requires a supply and production chain for clothes and steel, but these production buildings need to be monitored to avoid burning through basic resources you might need elsewhere. When you throw in several tiers of clan-specific upgrades, think passive buffs, new buildings and specialized units, the ability to plunder bandit camps and caves, donate supplies to neutral factions for rewards, and trade supplies in markets or with traders, growing your settlement quickly becomes an engaged and involving task, but never unmanageably so. Ultimately, you'll end up engaged in real-time combat, and it's strategic enough, though a mixed army and overwhelming numbers do the job 90% of the time. Just watch out for friendly fire if you're a fan of archers. When low on numbers, there's also the opportunity for some basic stealth using forests, hit-and-run tactics to remove resource or unit-producing buildings, and exploiting their AI, all made easier by the ability to pause or speed up the gameplay at any time. Given the setting, most maps have water bodies you can use to ferry troops around the back of enemy camps. However, ships carry so few units and have no crew of their own, so it quickly became an arduous approach that I rarely used unless the map left me no other choice. Now, despite the ability to build siege weapons and upgrade your basic units, think axemen all-rounders, defensive shield bearers, and deadly archers, all units destroy wooden buildings quickly with flaming torches, making homestead rushes a viable strategy. When your units engage in combat, each also has a special ability on a cooldown that usually gives them an edge in one-on-one combat, or it can bolster the effectiveness of their support skills. Outside of conventional warfare, capturing runestones provides access to Frozenheim's more fantastical elements, with passive blessings and offensive abilities provided by your devotion to the gods of Asgard. From a purely single-player perspective, the biggest problem with Frozenheim's campaign is the simplistic enemy AI That makes it easy to identify and fortify attack routes, or circumvent enemy patrol paths to hit their vital structures. It'll be a divisive choice, but the map layout is also clearly artificial, designed with defendable choke points or linear paths to the objective, with roadblocks along the way. For some, this might be soothingly nostalgic and a throwback to times with less complex scripting. For others, it means there are few dynamic events to keep you on your toes, and most missions play out as an elaborate player VAI skirmish map. One thing Frozenheim does consistently is look and sound great, even if the setting doesn't change much between the 5 campaigns. Units and buildings are intricately detailed to an absurd degree for an RTS, while every activity, think resource gathering, carting around building supplies or crafting in workshops, all plays out in real time, ensuring your settlement feels bustling and alive. Attacks on settlements also look great as flaming torches fly through the air and set buildings aflame, and smoke billows into the sky. The environment, and especially the foliage, is equally stunning. The changing seasons and weather provide a constant cycle of lush green summers, golden autumns, snow and windswept winters, and spring thunderstorms. The visual beauty and natural ambience are backed up by a beautiful and atmospheric soundtrack. Nothing's perfect, however, and there are several rough edges that can do with a patch or two. For one, despite the brisk loading times, Frozenheim exhibits a ton of texture and LOD streaming issues when you first load into a mission or a cutscene. The second issue is the limited or missing animations for building construction, destruction, and upgrades, with upgraded buildings literally popping into existence. The third and perhaps most prominent issue is the floaty movement in combat. Your units often feel disconnected from the map as they smoothly glide over it. While combat looks great up close, there's also little correlation between animations and damage. All that said, you'll barely notice most of these issues from the typical zoomed-out viewpoint, but that highlights another gameplay-related issue: selecting and issuing commands to groups of intricately modelled but tiny units. You'll quickly realize it's easier to pause and issue orders using the squad icons, but this becomes problematic when units are clustered. Overall, and especially given Frozenheim's budget price, I'd recommend its campaigns to the fans of classics like Age of Empires or Empire Earth, and maybe those who enjoyed the original Age of Kings campaign and Age of Empires 2. Slow and steady growth, defending against predictable incursions, building and upgrading your forces, and then steamrolling your foes is the name of the game. If, on the other hand, you were brought up on faster-paced RTS titles like Red Alert and StarCraft, where every moment is a battle to stay on top economically and militarily, you might find Frozenheim too predictable and boring. Ultimately, I'm having fun, but I still can't decide if parts of the experience are nostalgic or anachronistic.